This is how our typical project schedule will look like. On Thursday, the project manager will go remove and pick up the doors to bring them to the spray shop. Most of the time the helpers and sprayers won't be involved here except for certain occasions. Starting on the next Monday, the on-site refinishing work starts. This needs to be completed in 4 days, except in rare circumstances when it is a large project. Most of the time, a project can be completed in 4 9-to-5 workdays, but if the job cannot be completed in normal time, for example, if mistakes were made, the job needs to be completed anyways, even if it means working earlier or later than normal hours. Sometimes, for smaller or simpler jobs, the work can be completed in 3 days. The next Friday, 1 week later, we return to reinstall the newly refinished doors. When we put multiple jobs together in a row, you can see how it all fits together. You can see how important it is to be done by Thursday so that the doors can be installed at the previous project on Friday. Also, we often have counters being installed Friday morning, which means we need to be out of there by then. Now we will break down the different steps in the process of the on-site refinishing. All of these steps will have their own video you will watch later on, but let's start with the general order. The first step when we begin on Monday after unloading the tools is to begin masking. This is the longest step, so it's important to begin right away and work quickly and efficiently. Within this step, the first thing we mask is the floors to make sure they are protected right from the beginning. After masking comes demolition on projects where it is required. Not all projects will have demo to be done, but more often than not we do. You may want to leave the masking on the base cabinets until after you remove the counters to access the screws. If the demo involves making a lot of dust, for example cutting drywall, we should set up the plastic containment wall first to keep the dust from spreading. If this is not the case, we set up the containment wall next, after the demo. Next comes cleaning the cabinets. After the cabinets have been cleaned and allowed to dry, we sand them. The reason we clean first is because any oils will clog up the sandpaper. You may have gathered that these first steps in the preparation stage may have some overlap. For example, one person can set up the containment wall while the other begins cleaning. As long as the job is finished quickly and efficiently, while also not compromising on any quality, shuffling up the steps a little bit is okay when it makes sense to. Once the cabinets have been adequately sanded, the primer is sprayed. This is a very quick step as the primer dries very rapidly. If the primer went on rough or bumpy, you may need to do a quick sand before the next coat, although ideally you should be able to go straight to the first coat of lacquer without sanding. After the primer, we apply the first coat of lacquer. This product takes longer to dry, so there will be a bit of a break after this while you wait. Once that has dried, we do a fine sand to make sure the surface is nice and smooth. This shouldn't take too long. After the final sand, we caulk all the cracks. We caulk after sanding so that the sander doesn't ruin the caulking. Although you can spray on caulking right away, it takes a few hours before you can physically touch it. It would be a good idea in a two-man team to have one person sand and the other follow behind them doing the caulking. Finally, we apply the final coat. It's a good idea to do a quick cleanup and vacuum first, as excess dust can ruin the final finish. Once that is dried, you can do an inspection to make sure there are no errors or blemishes. Make sure the paint has covered the old cabinets adequately, especially when painting dark cabinets white. If necessary, you can then respray anything that needs to be repaired. We should be aiming to not have too much of this though, as it wastes a lot of time. Lastly, we clean everything up. Tear down all the masking, vacuum up all the dust, mop the floors, make sure the insides of the cabinets are clean, and pack up the tools. The doors won't be installed for another week, so we want to leave the clients with a clean kitchen until then. Here we can see an approximate schedule, hour by hour, for a smaller 3-day job. Obviously this will change a bit on a job-by-job basis, but we can use this as a rough skeleton to follow. If you are new to the company and watching this for the first time, a lot of these steps will make more sense later when you watch their respective videos. First, we have masking. I have it in here as a 4.5-hour job, although that may be pushing it even for a smaller project. Keep in mind though that this can overlap with the demolition for an hour or two, as one worker can smash tiles while the other masks walls, for example. We also have a half-hour lunch break, which will land in here somewhere. Next, I have demolition. 3 hours should be plenty of time for one guy to remove the tiles, unscrew the counters, and undo the plumbing, and then have both workers remove and carry out the counters and clean up the mess. At the end of Monday, we can set up the containment wall. This should be a pretty quick job for one guy. Remember that this may need to happen before the demo if you think you will be making any dust, but it is nice to do it after, as bringing the counters through the opening without ripping the wall down can be difficult. By the beginning of the second day, we hopefully have all the masking completed and can start the cleaning. There may be a little bit of masking left to do, but at least one of you should be starting cleaning by now. After the cleaning is done, and possibly after lunch break, the sanding can start. Sanding is normally pretty quick. I put in 2 hours here, but for a small kitchen, it could even just be 1. Once that is done, after wiping the dust off the cabinets and maybe doing a quick vacuum, you can spray the primer. To make things efficient, the sprayer can be setting up the paint and the gun while the helper is still sanding, so that he is ready to spray right away when the helper finishes the sanding. The primer goes on quick and dries quick, so this step should be less than an hour. Once the primer has dried completely, assuming the sprayer applied it properly and there are no mistakes to be fixed, the first coat of lacquer can be sprayed right away. Again, to keep things efficient and to avoid any standing around, the sprayer can prepare the lacquer while the helper cleans up the primer, for example. It's good to time things so that the lacquer is sprayed at the end of the day so that you can go home and let it dry overnight. Again, to avoid wasting any time standing around waiting for paint to dry. On the morning of the third and final day, we can do the fine sanding, followed by the caulking. These two jobs shouldn't take more than an hour each for small to medium-sized kitchens. Once that is done, after a quick cleanup and vacuum, you can spray the final coat. It would be good to wait outside of the room while this dries, to avoid stirring up any dust or accidentally touching something, so timing this before lunch so that it can dry during break is a good strategy. After lunch, assuming everything is dried by then, you can inspect all the surfaces for any mistakes or blemishes, and repair them if necessary. Obviously, avoiding this step is best as it can be a huge waste of time. And finally, we have the cleanup. On the final day, you may find that you'll have to work a little later than 5 o'clock to make sure all is completed. Please don't rush and half-ass the cleanup because you want to go home early. As already mentioned, we won't be back with the doors for another week, and the client will be using their kitchen in the meantime, so we want to leave it nice and clean for them. Make sure not to leave any masking behind either, especially on the lights under the cabinets. Here we can see the same schedule but for a larger project. The main difference you can see is that the masking will take up the better part of the first 2 days. Demo, cleaning, and sanding will also be longer. The spraying will be a little longer, but unless it's a huge project, it shouldn't take that much longer, as most of the time spent during the spraying is set up and drying, and paint dries at the same rate no matter how many cabinets there are. Again, you may find that you have to work later on the final day. It is your responsibility to get the project done on the 4th day, as counters are being installed on Friday. Only for very rare large jobs will a 5th day be needed, and we will plan ahead for that in such a case. If, early on in the project, you are noticing that it will be a tight fit to get everything done by Thursday, it would be wise to work just a little bit earlier or later during the first few days so that you're not stuck working late into the evening on Thursday. The sprayer is the head of each team, so he can make these calls. So there you have it, a rough overview of how our jobs run. Many of this will change a lot on a job-by-job basis. For example, on rainy days, the paint takes twice as long to dry, which will then shuffle over everything a bit. But as I said, this will serve as a good guide. If you're new to the company, the next videos you'll be watching will elaborate on each step and will teach you new skills that you will need to know. If you already work for us, this video can still be helpful to remind you how each week should run. For the leader of each team, keep in mind that we want the jobs to run efficiently, consistently, and on time. Getting more and more jobs completed in 3 days with fewer mistakes will allow the company to expand and will therefore allow each individual within the company to grow and move up.